Okay, so I think it's recording. There we go. I'll leave that up. I hope it's not too much of a distraction, but you can let me know if Brooke asks any questions there for me. So we're talking in these afternoon sessions, as you know, about the godliness of the speaker. The Put It Across section talks about how do we get this message that we've understood, and now we want to put it across. Well, that involves communication skills, which we've looked at. It requires that you know your audience, and it requires something of yourself as well. We're talking about the personal godliness of the speaker in these sessions. And in this one, we've got the subject of sex, which is not often spoken about. It's more actually family that I want to talk about. We did family last week, but it's more sex and marriage. It's that relationship we're talking about, relationships that are leading or are marriage. So let me pray as we start. Oh, gracious Father, we do pray that in our own lives we would imitate Christ, that at no time could people ever point a finger at us and say that we don't live up to what we believe. Help us, Lord, to live lives that are examples to the pagans, examples of grace, examples of godliness, and especially in this area of sex and relationships. In Jesus' name, amen. So the second fastest growing social network in the world after Facebook is, any ideas? AshleyMadison.com. AshleyMadison.com. AshleyMadison.com is a cheating relationship. It's a cheating network. It's a social network where you sign up in order to cheat on your spouse. So it is very sordid. It's the second fastest network in the world. It has 14 million users. I haven't checked in the last few months. It's probably more than 14 million users worldwide. There are 80,000 in South Africa who have signed up on this network. Yeah. So their motto is, life is short, have an affair. So they have about 1.8 million visits a month from their members. In 2012, they had their own Olympic Games. 287,000 members in 14 countries participated in the cheating Olympics. They even gave medals to the unfaithful. So that's the view of the world's view of marriage. The world thinks marriage is a joke. It thinks marriage is an absolute joke. Now, the Christian's view of marriage is something much bigger than that. Marriage for the Christian is actually a picture of something outside of this world. For the Christian, marriage is a picture of God. It's a picture of the relationship between God in heaven and His church on earth. That's why God has given us marriage. So that when we go to a wedding, maybe when we get married, when we look at married couples, we are reminded again, it's a bit like communion, we are being reminded again and again that God is married to His bride. He is going to come back and get her soon. And the second coming is Jesus collecting His bride and taking her back to heaven with Him, taking the church with Him. So for the Christian, marriage is very, very important. Whatever your marriage looks like, or whatever your view of marriage looks like, well, that shows what you believe about God. Because marriage really is meant to image God. It's meant to mirror God. Marriage is not just the coming together of two people. It is a picture of something much more important, the coming together of Jesus and His church. So God invented marriage. There was a time when there was no marriage, and God invented marriage. God says He needed a suitable helper for Adam. It doesn't mean that Eve is then the servant of Adam. She is the helper to Adam. She works side by side with Adam, doing what they've been given to do, which is to rule over creation. And so God takes a rib from the man, not a foot from the man, and makes the woman. She is not at his feet, she is from his side. She is equal in every way to the man, and they are joined together in marriage. God says it is not good for man to be alone. It's not meaning that it's not good for man to be lonely. That's not what he says. It's not good that man is lonely. He says it's not good that man is alone. What's the difference? Well, Adam was not lonely, was he? How could he have been lonely? He had God. You can't be lonely when you've got God. And he walked and he talked with God all day long. That's not being lonely. No, Adam was alone. In other words, he had been given this massive task to do, to name all the animals, to rule the earth by himself. So God wants to give him a helper. Now, what sort of helper should Adam, what's the best kind of helper that Adam needed? Would you have thought? With a massive job like that to do? Well, another man, surely. Someone big and strong who can wrestle lions and whatever. Surely God should have given Adam another Adam. But he doesn't. He gives Adam a wife. Why? A woman and not a man. What can a woman do that a man can't? Very obvious. Make babies. She can have babies. Why? Is it important that God gives Adam someone who can give him babies? Because the job is too big for even two people, two strong men, and even 1,000 strong men. The job is too big. To rule creation, you are going to need millions of people. God gives Adam a woman, and together they can produce the workers that they need to do what God's given them to do, which is to rule not the garden, it's to rule the world. They start in the garden, but the plan was always to make the wild world outside the garden like the garden. That was their job, to bring the world into submission to God. And for that, well, we're 7 billion people and counting, it's still not enough. The world's still not in submission to God. So the perfect helper for Adam is Eve, a woman. And together they can, and God says, go and be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Why? So that the whole earth must be filled, so that the whole earth can be brought into submission to God and his purposes. So God invents marriage for that purpose, for serving him. That's the view of marriage we must have. Marriage is people working together in the service of God. Okay? So we need to get that right with our young people when we're trying to get their thinking right about marriage. Marriage is not about finding a sexual partner. It is not for sexual enjoyment, per se. Marriage is for work. Marriage is to work together in God's kingdom, for God's glory. Now, sex comes up in marriage, and we'll come to that just now. But that's the most important thing. There's no suitable helper for Adam out of all the animals. Why? Because none of them can help Adam subdue the animals. They are what need to be subdued. They are part of the creation that needs to be ruled over. So, of course, none of them can help Adam do what he's got to do. No, he gives Eve. And so the Bible gives us God's plan and view for marriage. Now have a look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. This is where God invents marriage. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. So that's what marriage is. If you want to know what marriage is, it's that. It's a man leaving his father and mother, I guess a woman as well, being united to one another and becoming one flesh. So let's look at those components of what makes up marriage. Marriage is leaving. Marriage is leaving your family unit to establish a new family unit. That was how God was going to subdue the world. Through Adam and Eve, children leaving their home and starting new homes. Their children leaving that home and starting new homes and spreading across the world. Becoming independent and starting out your new family. When you leave your home to get married, you are starting a relationship that's more important than the relationship you left behind. The marriage relationship is more important than the parent-child relationship. It's a closer relationship. The lesser must give way to the greater. You don't leave your spouse to go and live with your parents. You leave your parents to live with your spouse. Therefore, your parents' relationship with you is less important than your relationship with your spouse. The less valuable gives way for something that's more valuable. It is more valuable to live with your spouse than to stay with your parents, obviously. The marriage relationship is stronger than the parent-child relationship, or should be, ideally. Half the problems of marriage is that that relationship with your parents is stronger than your relationship with your husband or your wife. And you have interference the whole time from family, because people haven't got it straight in their heads. The parents haven't, and the young couple haven't. That actually what we've got here is more precious, more important than what we left behind. You've got to get that right. You've got to leave. You're first a husband, and then you're a son. You're first a wife, and then you're a daughter after you're married. So if your responsibilities to your parents are getting in the way of your responsibilities to your husband or to your wife, what do you give up? What are your responsibilities to your parents? Not in the sense that you now neglect or abuse them, but they cannot interfere and mess up your marriage. You've got your priorities the wrong way around if you see them as being more important than what you've got with your husband or wife. Michelle?
I agree with you. Just thinking about what if you have parents or one of your parents have passed away.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that, but that's the rule. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Now, obviously, in Adam and Eve's time, there was no elderly parents. No one got sick and old and died. So now, because of sin, we've got all these plan Bs that we've got to make. But usually, when a young couple want to get married, their parents aren't old and sick and elderly, old and sick and single. Usually, parents are, 50, 60 when you get married? And they can look after themselves for those first 10, 15 years. I think I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm going to have to start taking care of my parents. We might have to move house and move closer to them, or move them closer to us, so that I can start looking after them. And that will put a strain on my relationship. But even then, I mustn't allow that to break up my marriage. I've got to keep the priorities right. I do have to care for them. I have a responsibility. But my first responsibility is to my wife, not to my parents. Yeah. You've got to find a way of caring for both, but not putting your wife in a difficult position where she's sharing you with your parents. It's not a case of sharing. You're first a husband and a wife to one another, then you're a son or a daughter to look after your parents. So leave. The second part is cleave, or be united, as Genesis says, be united. That means to cling to stay close to get stuck to, like in glue. You be united together, be stuck together. You're now in a permanent relationship with one another. It's not a casual relationship like you have with friends, and then you head off for varsity, and then you might meet up again in 10 years. No, this is a relationship that you are stuck in and stuck together. You go through life together, through thick and thin. It's commitment. That is the basis of marriage, commitment. And that is a picture of God to us. This idea that He is committed to us through thick and thin. And so that's why it's such a big thing when Israel decides to break the covenant and leave God and go after other gods. They are breaking this commitment. And so commitment is the basis of your marriage, not love. Love will grow throughout your marriage. What you need at the start of your marriage is not love, but commitment. I never ever told my wife I loved her until after we got married. I said to her, I'm not going to say I love you, because how do you know if I'm telling the truth? The only way you can tell that someone loves you is when they put a ring on your finger. I am committing myself to you. Now I'm showing you I love you. Now you can know that. You've got something, wrong hand, you've got something to show for it. So we commit ourselves to one another, and then we learn to love one another after that. Don't get it the wrong way around. People feel in love, so they move in together with no commitment, and then they find that when the feeling goes, because there's no commitment, the relationship, they go their separate ways. And then they come together again and they live with another person who they feel in love with. But there's no commitment there. And when that feeling goes, because there's no commitment, they go their separate ways and they come together with another one. And so people go through life like that. And it's serial polygamy. You know, we laugh at Jacob Zuma because he's got so many wives. But the Western world doesn't have the whole lot of wives at the same time. They have them one after the other. And worse than Jacob Zuma, they don't bother to marry them. We don't commit to anything. We don't commit to one person. We don't commit to 3 or 4. How many wives has he got? 4 or 5? BC is committed to them. Well, he's meant to be. He is unfaithful to them, as we all know. But the idea is that the Western world is no better than African tradition. At least in African tradition, you marry the woman and you provide for her. So feelings can never be the basis of marriage. Commitment, promise. A promise is the basis of marriage. And that shouldn't surprise us because a promise is at the root. Promise is the basis of how God relates to us. He promises us, and then he carries out his promise. And that's what marriage is. Do you remember what people say? I, Andy, take you, Belinda, in my case, to be my wedded wife. And I make a promise to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to care for until death parts us, according to God's holy law. This is my solemn pledge to you. Marriage is based on a pledge, a promise, through thick and through thin. Forsaking all others, I will be committed to you. That's what you do when you stand in front of a church and make that promise. It's a promise. So love comes and goes. The feelings of love comes and goes. But commitment is something that is permanent. You don't feel the same way about your spouse forever. You don't even feel the same way about certain food forever. You grow in your taste, in the way you think about things like olives. Young kids hate olives. As you get older, people love olives. Your tastes change. So how do you know if you're still going to love this person 20 years from now? Well, you don't. That's no reason not to get married, because love is not the basis of marriage. I can tell you I will be committed to my wife in 20 years' time. I can't tell you how I will feel about her in 20 years' time. But the commitment will be there, and God honors the commitment, and the love will grow. The love doesn't actually evaporate. Love grows in a marriage over 20, 40, 50, 60 years. We've got a couple in this church who are 60 years. Love grows and grows and grows. So it's not, in some vows today, people don't say, until death do us part. They say, until I don't love you anymore. That is the modern, I'm not joking, that is the modern marriage vow in a humanistic society. People don't get married in a church anymore. They get married in front of a magistrate, and they say, I promise to be faithful to you while I love you. Not till while I'm alive. While I'm still loving you, I will not sleep with someone else. I'll sleep with you. But when I don't feel like I love you anymore, then my promise doesn't count anymore, and I can go and have sex with someone else, because actually I've never promised to be faithful my whole life, just until I feel like I'm not in love with you anymore. So if a marriage is based on love, think about it, then it's actually based on looks. It's based on looks, or it's based on cooking, or it's based on whatever attracted you to that person in the first place. When that thing is gone, whether it's the looks, or the figure, or the money, or whatever it was that attracted you to that person in the first place, when that's gone, the marriage is gone. But if your marriage is based on a promise, promises are forever, then the looks don't count. The looks don't matter. I mean, in my wedding speech, I remember saying that I don't know what's going to happen in our lives. I don't know if we're going to leave this church or leave our reception, have a car smash, and Belinda will be disfigured for the rest of her life. I don't know. Suddenly, I've got a wife that doesn't look anything the way she looks on this day. What am I meant to do? Well, I'm meant to be faithful because I've made a promise. And this marriage is based on a promise, not on her looks, because those change. This is especially a problem for guys. Surprise, surprise. But I remember when I was at varsity, so many times guys would come to me and say, I don't know if this is the right girl for me. Should I get engaged? All this stuff. I used to say to every single one of them, I'll give you 6 months. I promise you, I can make you a promise that within 6 months of getting married, you are going to meet, or maybe a year to be generous, but within 6 months, you're going to meet someone that you will think would have been a better wife than the person you've married. That's scary, girls. It is true. Why? Because it takes about 6 months to realize the faults in the person. You don't know the person until you've lived with them for 6 months. Suddenly, all the things that she was hiding from you, that she was always on her best behavior. You only saw each other on dates. I take it that Christians aren't living together and sleeping together before their marriages. But you're on your best behavior on a date and whatever else. But after 6 months, you started to get to know the person, and that will irritate you, and that will irritate you. And along comes the new secretary who doesn't irritate you in any of those ways. And you will be thinking, if only I'd married her, because she doesn't irritate me in any of the ways my wife irritates me. What you don't yet know is what ways the new secretary will irritate you in 6 months' time. Because that's how it works. It is two imperfect people getting married. People who are going to irritate each other in different ways. So there are things about Belinda that irritate me, but there are things about other girls that irritate me, but they're not the same things that Belinda irritates me. And you have got to work it out. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to sort this out? Well, non-Christians usually fight it out. Christians, hopefully, are gracious. Christians understand that God has accepted us with all the things that we irritate him with. He's accepted us and married himself to us. And we would jolly well stay married to the person that irritates us. And actually you find that after about 10 years, you've figured it all out. You know where you stand. And it's okay. First 10 years of the hardest. Well, you are to leave. You are to be united. You are to be of one flesh. And here we're talking about sex, the Bible's polite way of talking about having sex. Sex belongs not to people who are together, but to people who belong together. The world thinks that sex is for people who are together. So if we get together, we can have sex. You know, if we start up some sort of relationship, we start having sex. That's just how things work. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible says sex is for people who belong together. In other words, who have given themselves to each other. I belong to Belinda. That's the Bible's language. My body is her body. It belongs to her and no one else. She has given up the rights to her life and given those rights to me. It's like the title deeds to your house or your car. You're handing them over. You don't have to get married, but if you do get married, that's what you're doing. You're handing over to the other person the rights to your life. You're saying, my life belongs to you now. My body belongs to you now. And she does the same to you. All I have, all I am, I give to you. Remember that part of the marriage thing? It's the handing over of the rights to your life. And now you're entitled to have sex, because then you will be having sex for the good of the other person, not for what you can get out of it. For this world, in this world, sex is for what you can get out of it. It's an abuse of each other. Sex is for yourself. In a marriage, sex is for the other person. And only once you've given yourself to the other person are you entitled to have sex with the other person. So you might be expecting me to say that sex, and we shouldn't be having sex before marriage. But that's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that we shouldn't be having sex outside of marriage. There's a big difference. You see, sex before marriage is one thing, but sex outside of marriage is quite another thing. It's a much bigger thing. So I might never have had sex before marriage. Naughty badge for me, you know. So why do I think I need a reward for that? But I could be having sex outside my marriage. Unfaithfulness. You see? The Bible doesn't talk about only sex before marriage. It talks about sex outside of marriage. No sex outside of marriage. Why? Because sex belongs within marriage. Why? Because sex is between two people who have given up the rights to their lives to the other person. That's what sex is for. And so no sex outside of marriage. Sex is not for pleasure in a marriage. Well, it's not for your pleasure. It's for the pleasure of the other person. It's you redeclaring your faithfulness to that person. That's what sex is. You're serving the other person, not serving yourself, which is the opposite of what sex in the world is. Sex in the world is you serving yourself. Usually having as much sex with as many people as you can. Christian sex is within marriage. God is pro-sex. God invented sex. Sex is his idea. There was a time when there was no sex, right? And God gives Eve to Adam. Now he says, have lots of sex. He invents it. He actually commands it within marriage. We are not to be not having sex within marriage. So the idea is no sex outside of marriage and no abstinence within marriage. That's God's plan. You must be having sex within your marriage. It's what will keep you going, but you may not have sex before or outside of your marriage. And so God has built this incredibly strong desire for sex into human beings for a very good reason, to keep marriages together. Because sometimes that's all that will keep a marriage together. Sometimes it's the sex that keeps the marriage together while you work out your difficulties. But if you take the sex outside of marriage and have sex with everyone, well, then there's hardly any reason to be faithful, well, to work out your marriage problems, is there? When you can get what you're looking for from anyone. So that's the design of marriage. What about the ruin of marriage? Well, that comes at the fall, as you would have expected. Creation, therefore, is the backdrop for marriage. God created the world for human beings. In fact, it's bigger than that. He created the universe for human beings. He created the stars for us to remind us of him behind the stars. The stars declare, the heavens declare the glory of God. The stars are preaching at us. Don't forget God. Don't forget God. Look at me. Look how big God must be. The universe was created for us, for marriage actually, and marriage was created for something bigger than marriage, which is a relationship with God himself. Now at the fall, what do we find? We find people stopping serving each other and starting to serve themselves. She looked at it. She thought it would be a good thing to eat, so she ate it. She's thinking of herself. Adam looked at it. He thought it was nice to eat. He thought he would enjoy it. He eats it. They start serving themselves and forget that they need to be serving God and living in obedience to God. And they give up the most precious relationship that you can have, and that's your relationship with God. God binds himself to relationship with Adam and Eve, and they break that relationship. They are unfaithful to him by disobeying him, and people get hurt. Things go completely wrong. And you know the story. The man blames the wife blames the snake, and the snake doesn't have a leg to stand on, as they say. Okay, they all blame each other, and in fact, Adam blames God. Why did you give me this woman? It's your fault. The woman blames the snake. Well, the snake told me to do it. None of them will take responsibility. They all point fingers at each other and at God, and the whole relationship breaks down. Every relationship, every single relationship at every single level breaks at that point. The relationship between Adam and Eve was broken. Now they're ashamed of each other, and they quickly want to cover up from each other. Before, there was nothing between them. Their nakedness is just a picture of their complete openness with one another. Suddenly they cover up. Suddenly they're suspicious. Suddenly they want to hide things from each other in their marriage. Suddenly there's things that I don't want you to know about me in my marriage. Then their relationship with God is broken. Their relationship with the creatures is broken because they allow the creature to rule over them instead of them ruling over the creatures. And then the relationship of them with themselves is broken. Suddenly human beings have got all sorts of psychological problems. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're meant to be doing with their lives. They're searching for meaning and all these things. Why? Because that relationship of you with yourself is even broken. Every relationship is broken at that point. And so there comes conflict. So there comes divorce. the breakdown, the formal breakup of a marriage. But the statistics of marriage and divorce and remarriage show us that actually divorce is not the answer to a breakdown in a relationship. In America, they did some studies. The number of Americans who describe their marriage as being very happy dropped by 10%. There used to be a certain, I don't know what percentage of people said they were very happy. Nowadays, that has dropped 10%. In America, the divorce rate is 41%. This was 2002. It's gone up now. It's close to 50%. And by the way, in America, it's nearly exactly the same among Christians and non-Christians, the divorce rate. There's almost no difference in the divorce rate between the church and the world in America. So in 2002, the divorce rate was 41% for the first marriages. Of those 41% who then get divorced and get remarried, the divorce rate amongst the remarrieds would be, what do you think? People would have learned their lesson, they're a bit wise, a bit old, a bit more mature. 60%. 60% of remarriages end up in divorce. Those people go out and get remarried a third time. What do you think the divorce rate there is? Now they're much older, much wiser, much more chance to choose the right person, 73%. 41, now in 2002, it's all gone up now. You can just move them all up. 41% for first marriages, 60% for second marriages, 73% for third marriages. My brother-in-law's parents have been divorced. Well, his mom has been divorced 6 times, maybe 7. 2 of those marriages were back to the same guy again, and then they got divorced the second time. People just keep getting married, divorced and remarried, divorced and remarried, divorced and remarried. Why? The answer is very, very simple, isn't it? They're looking for something in that person that only God can provide. You're expecting a man, ladies, and us guys are expecting a lady to provide for us what only God can give us. Now, that's a tall ask, isn't it? That's asking a bit much of a guy. Why do you expect him to be able to give you comfort and companionship and fellowship, the things that only God can give you? And no wonder you divorce and you move on to the next marriage, looking for the same thing. And that person, they can't provide, they're not God, so you go to the next person, trying to find fulfillment, trying to feed this hunger, which is actually a hunger for God, but the world doesn't believe it. They don't believe it's for God, they believe it's for pleasure, I guess. So what's the rescue of marriage? The rescue of marriage, wow, look at the time, is to serve Christ. We are to serve Jesus. That is the rescue of our marriages. Ephesians, I have to start flying. Ephesians chapter 5 gives us the model for marriage. Wives are to submit to their husbands as to the Lord. We spoke about submission last week and what that really means. The husband must serve his wife the way Christ served his church and laid down his life for the church. That's what a husband must do. Lay down his life for his wife. And she must submit to that. She must let him. And that is the rescue plan for marriage. That's how God relates to all of us. He serves us. And he expects that model to be taken and applied in marriage, where the husband does what God does. The wife does what the church does. The church submits to God and obeys him. The wife submits to her husband's service and obeys him. And why wouldn't she, if he's laying down his life for her? Jesus, Mark says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but what is the fate of marriage then? Well, the fate of marriage is tragedy. I'm sorry to say, every marriage is going to end in tears. That's what I always say to young couples I'm counseling before they get married. You do realize this is going to end in tears. Because in our vows we say, until death parts us. Marriage ends in death. It does end in tears. Even if it's a 60-year marriage, it's only temporary. It's going to end in tears. There's no marriage in heaven, because remember, marriage was given for the service of God in subduing creation. There's no need to do that in heaven, and so there is no marriage in heaven. Well, the fulfillment of marriage. I think we've covered most of this. Just saying that human marriage is a signpost to something much bigger. It's a signpost to a relationship that God wants to have with you. Your desire to get married is actually a little dig in the side. God's saying, I know you desire a husband. I know you desire a wife. I built you that way. But a much more important desire is your desire for me. It's a reminder that your desire ought to be for God. God is wanting a close relationship with you, a personal relationship with you. That's why that same passage in Ephesians ends, this is a mystery. I'm talking about Christ and the church. Marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. As wonderful as a marriage can be, the perfect marriage that every little girl dreams of, if everything works out fine, and she does marry her prince on his white horse, and he does carry her off into the sunset, and they do have the most wonderful marriage ever for 60, 70 years, that happiness is only a tiny measure of the happiness that will come with a relationship with God. But we don't believe that. We keep looking for that happiness that we can only have with God. We keep looking for that in marriages. But actually, marriage just gives you a teaspoon of happiness compared to what is coming. We must be people who live by faith in what is coming, not looking for that happiness in our marriages. That would be a foolish thing to do, to expect my wife to give me the happiness that only God can give me. That's asking far too much. Marriage is just two people who are committed to God, committing together to work for God. They don't have to be compatible. They don't have to be the same race. They do have to be opposite sexes. They may not be the same sex. But it is just two people coming together to work for God's glory. That's what marriage is, reminding us of the coming together later of God and his church. Well, let's talk quickly about dating. What leads to marriage? I've jumped over a whole lot of things here. We might have time later on to pick up some of those things. While crossing a bridge in London, John Wesley, in the mist, stumbled and he fell, and he badly sprained his ankle. Freed him from the bridge, a house very nearby that they knew that belonged to Mary Vazel. They carried him there. She was very kind. She was a widow with several children, and she fixed him up, bound up his leg, and they started seeing each other, and they got married. Actually, they didn't start seeing each other. They just decided to get married. Well, if we were writing this as a love story, we might say that the sprained ankle was God's way of bringing these two wonderful people together, John Wesley and Mary Vazel. But their marriage was a total disaster. It ended up with Mary leaving John Wesley. John Wesley writes in his diary later, my wife has left me. I will not be asking her to come back. It was a very, very unhappy marriage. If Wesley had only asked at least his brother, Charles Wesley, who was also a wise Christian, although you'd think he wasn't, if he had only asked what Charles thought, or what people that he trusted thought about this relationship, they could have saved each other a lot of pain, John Wesley and his wife Mary. She was accustomed to a very, very quiet life. John Wesley was never at home. He was preaching literally all over the world. He'd jump on a ship and disappear to America for 8 months. He just was never, ever at home. He was on his horse, riding around, preaching all over England and all over the world. It would have been bad enough if she had just not been interested in John's ministry. She actually hated it. She actually opposed it. She gave certain of his enemies to try and tear him apart, to try and break down his ministry. Once, he writes in his diary, she even pulled him around on the floor of their house by his hair. That was their marriage. He says that the unhappy marriage meant that he worked harder and harder than ever before, and that, of course, made the marriage even worse. I did not ask her to leave. I will not be asking her to come back, says John Wesley. Well, how can we avoid that? Well, dating is one way. Every culture has got its own way of two people getting to know each other, at least to the point where they can decide, I'm prepared to commit to this person forever. I'm prepared to lay down my life for this person. I'm prepared to give up the title deeds for my life to that person and entrust my life into their hands. Somehow you need a way of trying the best you can to see if that's going to work. Now, dating is a Western thing. Usually what happens is the parents get together and they work out whether these two are going to be a good match, whether they think that these two would be able to learn to love one another eventually. And so it's arranged marriage. And I think that's a wonderful idea. Who knows you than your parents, if they're Christian, and if they've got the glory of God in mind when they do it. That's a great idea. Why not? Why not? Saves you a lot of stress. Arrange the marriage. Nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah. Absolutely serious. Absolutely serious. I intend to do that for my children. Don't tell them. No, but a lot of cultures that still happens. The Muslim culture, a child in my daughter's class, she's been pledged since standard 6, grade 8 to someone. She knows she's going to get married next year when she leaves school. They've been pledged together. They've had a betrothal, an engagement party already when they were 12. Their parents are Muslims. I believe they still do that. Mm-hmm. Forcing them, yeah. The one thing you are forcing is you're not giving them a choice not to get married. So singleness, that's the trouble with arranged marriages, is that it says that it's saying that singleness is wrong. We want to make absolutely sure our daughter gets married, so we'll arrange it. Now, singleness is not wrong. Singleness is a great option for Christians. Paul says, do not get married until you've until you've thought about singleness as an option, because singleness is preferable to marriage. Go and read Corinthians. So that's the trouble with arranged marriages, is that if you give your daughter the chance of saying, actually, it's not that I don't like the guy you've arranged with me, I just don't want to get married because I want to work for the Lord, well, you've got to say that's much better than marriage. That's fine. But actually, two Christian parents getting together and helping their children get married, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The Bible never speaks against it. Yeah. Yeah. No, sure. That's right. But arranging a marriage for your children, it's very very anti-Western. It's very anti-Western. But is it anti-African? No. Is it actually most of the world, it's how it happens. In the East, in Africa, arranged marriages, and they work. The divorce rates there are much lower than in the West, where dating, we think, is the answer, which usually leads to sex before marriage, which usually leads to pregnancies before marriage, which then leads to single mothers, who then have a hangover life after that, trying to keep their lives together, all because we think dating is the answer. Can you tell me which is the better? I know a couple in Australia. This guy was, I think, from South Korea, an Australian, but from South Korean descent, and a North Korean girl escaped from North Korea. You know, Christianity is banned in North Korea. She got out as a student and then asked for political asylum, became a Christian. Korean girl who can't go home again needs a husband. So the pastor says, you're a Korean from South, you're a Korean. He said, okay, I'll marry her, I'll look after her, get married. They're the most amazing couple. They haven't put their marriage as the most important thing in their lives. They know that they are together to serve one another and to serve Christ.
But isn't that the point? Because you're using Muslim for example, and
Of Christ, exactly, yeah.
You know, it doesn't. If parents are so worried about putting their children to marriage, I mean, I just think it's weird.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, those people, even if you put them in their marriages, they don't want to serve Christ.
Yeah, no.
Marriages because they're scared that their community will kill them if they get divorced or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not because they love Christ.
No.
It's a bit of a red herring.
Yeah. No, but I'm being serious when I say that I think Christians, let's talk about just Christians. I think in Christian families we should do more to help our children in marriage. Yeah. To get married.
Yes.
To arrange their marriges.
Well, you can make friends with me and set it up and
Yeah.
I suppose if you know your child well and he meets a guy
Yeah.
who you think is
Yeah.
compatible,
Yeah. Who has the same priorities?
but then ultimately as people though, to meet
Oh, yeah. They're going to be adults who have to stand and make their own promises before God. No, for sure. Yeah, no. It's not, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah. It's facilitating marriage. Yeah. 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 Because, yeah. Yeah. No. That's right. So what do we do in the West? Our answer is at 18, we send our kids off to university in Cape Town. They get married in the next 5 years while they're in Cape Town. We get invited to a wedding. And we get surprised when there's big problems later on because no one is on hand to counsel them, to help them, to say, actually, this guy, I can see straight through him. He is bad news. He's bought you all these roses. Don't fall for it, because I know you. And I'm older. I can see this guy, what he's doing, you see. We send our kids off. Go overseas. Go and live overseas. Go and see the world. We think that's a good idea as Christians. That's the worst idea I can think of, to give my kid a plane ticket for her birthday, 18th birthday, and say, go and see the world. You've got to be joking. No. That's not what God has given children in our care to do, you see. So when I say arranged marriage, I'm not saying you don't know your husband, but you arrive on this day, you'll meet him. I'm not saying that. I'm saying let's help our kids find marriage partners that will suit them, rather than letting them try to find a marriage partner that they'll regret for the rest of their lives. I'll be friends again. Okay. Right, my next thing is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. You might have seen that book that came out. It was very popular a little while ago, Men Are From Mars. Basically saying we are totally different. How do we expect marriages to work when we are so different? Guys are completely different to girls. Surprise, surprise. Guys, it's all visual. So guys, what strikes a guy first is visual, the visual impact of a girl. What strikes a girl, now you help me, girls, I'm a girl, but it's the link is much more emotional to a relationship. So for a guy, that's why pornography is such a much bigger issue for guys than for girls. It's a big issue for girls and growing, but it's still half as much of a problem as it is for guys. I think they said in a survey I read recently, like 70% or 60% of guys admit to watching pornography so many times a week, and 30% of girls. So it's about half. It's still a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem for girls, but the visual impact is much stronger for a guy than for a girl. A girl is swept away by words. A guy is swept away by looks. That's what I'm trying to say. Touch for a girl is a big thing. That's why guys must be very careful of what we think is an innocent hug is interpreted in a completely different way when it comes to the girl. Touch, words, emotional signs and signals in a relationship girls pick those things up. Guys are oblivious to those things. They haven't a clue. A friendly hug or a touch on the hand for a guy is like, for a girl, it's like, this is it. This is the guy for me. So we need to be really, really careful. Number one, of how we treat the opposite sex. So girls need to be very careful of how they dress, because the way you dress will make a big impact on the guys, especially in church. You need to help the guys in your church, not be a stumbling block to them. Guys must be very careful with the way they talk to girls. The way if they try and get too close emotionally to a girl, she will interpret it completely differently to what he just wants to be friends. She thinks this guy's like the best thing ever. He's oblivious to it. So we need to just be aware that there are differences between us. We function differently. The most helpful verse I've ever come across in the Bible before I was married and even after is in 1 Timothy 5, verse 2. Treat older women as mothers, younger women as sisters. That is the most helpful words a young guy could ever hear. Treat the older women as mothers and the younger women as sisters. In other words, until the day you are married, until there's a ring on the finger, that girl is your sister. That guy is your brother. He is not your husband. He is not your boyfriend. She is not your girlfriend. She is your sister. You are Christians. You are not like the world. where we are, trying out sex together to see if we should get married later or whatever. How do you treat your brother? How do you treat your sister, your blood brother? That's how you treat your boyfriend. That's how you treat your girlfriend. It's so simple. It's so helpful. I was so grateful to find that verse before I was married. Simply treat the younger girls in your church as if they're your sisters. Treat the older girls in your church like they're your mother. Can't go wrong. You can't go wrong if you do that. Sorry? 1 Timothy 5, verse 1 and 2. 1 Timothy 5, verse 1 and 2.
But despite that, there is a girl, a sister that you like a bit more, and you're getting to know her, and you're not treating exactly the same as all the other
Yeah.
sisters.
No, that's right. And
sweetheart.
yeah, that's where the church again needs to help young couples, So yes, of course, Robin and what's his name? Stuart are engaged. I don't care that they're engaged. She is still his sister. And she will be his sister until they get married. And it's my job to make sure he treats her like a sister. And to help him treat her like a sister. And so I do. Every now and again, I walk past. And I say to him, Stu, how's it going with Robin? Are you watching yourself? Where are the boundaries? Are you letting things slip? I must help. I'm his brother. Brothers help brothers to help them to love their sisters. But everyone recognizes that there's something special between them, and everyone respects that, and everyone, but everyone's watching them and keeping them accountable. They should be. Remember that that girl is somebody else's spouse until she is yours. You're holding hands with someone else's husband or someone else's wife if they're not your own. They are God's child. They are God's future bride, actually. They belong to Christ. So be careful how you treat them until you put a ring on their finger. Then she's no longer your sister. Now you are to leave, cleave, and have sex with that person. But not until then. Not until there's commitment in the relationship. So what are God's qualifications for a marriage partner? Very simple. They must be Christian. That's the first priority. Don't care what they look like. They must be Christian. They must be unmarried. You may not look at another man's wife or another woman's husband that is coveting your neighbor's wife or husband. They must be unmarried, and they must be the opposite sex. We've got to say that these days, because marriage between same sex is allowed. There are other things as well, like if they are divorced, you've got to ask why were they divorced. So there are other things you've got to deal with, because we fall in a broken world. I think there's times when divorced people shouldn't get remarried. Times, not always. I think it's fine for divorced people to usually get remarried. But I think there are cases where a divorced person shouldn't get married, or where my daughter mustn't marry a divorced guy, if there's specific reasons. But it's got nothing to do with they must be the same race, nothing to do with, oh, he's got to be a bit older than you. It's got nothing to do with he must be rich, or, we've got to pay off a house first, or he's got to finish his studies and then we can get married. The Bible doesn't talk about any of that. It says if you can find someone like that, marry them, if you think it will help you in your service of the God's kingdom. Phew, how are we doing? I've run out of time. The Bible is against mixed marriage. Did you know that? It's against mixed marriages. It says, do not be unequally yoked. So I'm not talking about mixed races. Moses married an Ethiopian woman, a black woman from Ethiopia. So it's not against mixed marriages. It's against mixed racial marriages. It's against mixed marriages between Christians and non-Christians. You may not get into a mixed marriage. Do not be yoked with an unbeliever. Corinthians says, what does darkness have with light? What does darkness have in common with light? You may not marry someone who is not a believer. A woman who is divorced or abandoned is allowed to remarry in Corinthians. It says, but he must be a believer. It's very clear. People try and get around that one. It is very clear. If that person, if that guy, if that girl is not a Christian, you've got to treat them as if they're a different species. They belong to the darkness. They are children of the devil. I don't care how nice they are. They belong to Satan. You don't marry them with the hope that they'll become children of the light. You marry a child of the light. Lots of people. Yeah. No. It's a different species. A non-Christian is a different species. It's like dating a horse. And that's what you must think about. This guy is a horse. I may not date a horse. I must find a human to date. I've got down the physical limits in dating. We don't have too much time about that. The question is always, how far can I go? Well, that's the Pharisees' question. You know, who is my neighbor? Who do I have to love so that I know who I have to, and then I don't have to love other people? How far can I go? The answer is nowhere. She's your sister. Go as far as you can go with your sister. That's how far. You can go nowhere until you're married. Sex and sexual arousal is for marriage. That's what it's for. How far can I go? Nowhere. Nowhere. Engagements, my policy is as short as possible. As long as it takes to make a dress and a cake. That's as long as your engagement must be. The engagement is an incredibly difficult time in a marriage. There's immense pressure, family pressure on you. Everyone wants to have a say in your wedding. It's incredibly stressful. But there's incredible sexual pressure on you as well. Suddenly, I don't know what it is, suddenly sexual temptation just gets escalated. It just goes up a level when you're engaged. You know you're as good as married. You know that if you're a Christian, engagement is serious. You're not messing around now. Now you've decided you're getting married. And suddenly sexual temptation is incredibly hard. So as short as possible. Cohabiting, well, that's living together. Really, remember what God's plan is? It's for people to commit to one another. Cohabiting is people living together with the door open. With the back door open, they can walk out at any stage because there's no commitment. There are no vows. You've made no vows. You've done nothing public. There is nothing keeping you together. You can walk out anytime you like, and that is no way to live. That is not God's plan. That's not how God deals with us. He doesn't walk out whenever he feels like it. But cohabiting, living together, that's what it is. It's a nightmare. It is a disaster. So that's why cohabiting, and I've got lots more I want to say about that. But just to finish with this, that the percentage of failed marriages is much higher for people who have lived together than for people who haven't. Living together before marriage does not work. It does not help to make your marriage a success. It actually works in the opposite way, not surprisingly, since it's not God's way. And then lastly, and this is the last thing, singleness. The world says that you have to be fulfilled, you've got to be married. You've got to get married to have a fulfilled life. That's rubbish, right? The command to Adam and Eve was to get married, to be fruitful, to multiply and fill the earth. That was the command to Adam and Eve. That's not the command to us. Our command is to go out into the world and make disciples. We are to go and make children for heaven, not children for earth. Christians populate heaven. Adam and Eve had to populate the earth. And so your command is to go and preach the gospel, not to go and have children. If you want to have children, of course you may. That's fine. If you want to get married and have children, there's nothing against that. But to yearn, to agonize, to live, to dream for marriage is idolatry. My single friends say, I don't know how hard it is to be single. And I say, you don't have no idea how hard it is to be married. Both bring their own challenges. Both bring their own opportunities and mission fields. So singleness, Paul says, you really should consider singleness as an option if you're a Christian.
What you're saying suggests you can be married, Christian married people and not children.
Yeah. No, okay, that's not what I'm saying. I know people who think that. I think that if you're going to get married, you may not then say, well, we're not going to have children. That is self-seeking. Unless you're going to say, we're going to go and be missionaries in North Korea, and the chance are going to get killed. If you get married, you have children. That's what it is. You may not have sex if you get married. You're commanded that you're not allowed to abstain from sex in marriage. Sex is children. And so be prepared to take on the responsibility of children. And the rule is that you can't have kids. You find you can't have kids. But the rule is when you have kids. And really don't get married. Let me leave it there.